Imagine living in a democracy where your local council suddenly decides that holding an election is just too much bother, too much hassle, requires too much capacity, so they simply postpone it for 2 years without asking your permission. Sounds like something from a tin pot dictatorship rather than 21st century Britain, doesn't it? Well, buckle up, because that's exactly what's about to happen to over 5 million people across dozens of Labour-controlled councils this May. Elections that should be happening, that voters have a right to participate in, that represent the fundamental democratic principle of holding power to account, are being cancelled, not because of war, not because of pandemic, not because of national emergency, but because councils apparently cannot be bothered to organise them whilst simultaneously managing local government reorganisation. And Reform UK has had enough. They're heading to court, preparing a judicial review, coming at the government with everything they've got, and frankly, it's about time someone stood up for the millions of voters being silently disenfranchised by Labour's convenience politics. Quick favour, if you're already fuming about this, hit that subscribe button and smash the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps us keep exposing these stories. Cheers if you did. Right, let's dive into this democratic scandal. So let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here, because the scale of this disenfranchisement is genuinely staggering. More than 20 Labour councils, covering approximately 4 million people, possibly more according to latest reports, are expected to have their elections cancelled this year. Not postponed by a few weeks due to logistics, not delayed by a month because of unforeseen circumstances, but completely cancelled and pushed back until 2027. That's 2 years, 2 years during which these councils will operate without facing voters, without democratic accountability, without the basic check and balance that elections provide. And their justification? They don't have the capacity to hold a vote whilst managing local government reorganisation. Capacity, as if running elections, the cornerstone of democracy, is some optional luxury that can be shelved when it becomes inconvenient. Reform UK's chairman, Zia Youssef, has come out swinging, telling GB News that his party is ready to mount a judicial review in the High Court to try to force the government to overrule the council's requests. Reform's lawyers are coming at them with everything we've got, Youssef declared, and honestly, good. Someone needs to fight this. Someone needs to stand up and say that cancelling elections because they're a bit of a faff is utterly unacceptable in a functioning democracy. This isn't about party politics, this is about democratic principle. If you can cancel elections for administrative convenience, what's the point of having fixed terms at all? Why not just let councils govern indefinitely until they fancy facing voters? It's the kind of logic that leads down very dark roads indeed. Let's talk about how we even got to this point, because the backstory reveals a government that seems remarkably comfortable with curtailing democratic participation when it suits their administrative preferences. Last month, ministers asked 63 councils in England if they wanted to delay their elections until 2027 so they could, in the government's words, bed in a local government shake-up. Bed in a shake-up. That's bureaucratic speak for we're reorganising how councils work, and we'd rather not have the inconvenience of elections getting in the way. These 63 councils were given until midnight on Thursday this week to say if they wanted a delay, and ministers helpfully said they would be minded to agree to any postponement. Minded to agree, that's not setting a high bar for approval. That's basically saying, if you want to cancel your election, we'll rubber stamp it. The response was predictable. Sources have told the Times newspaper that 27 local authorities covering more than 5.2 million people and 3.7 million registered voters will ask the minister for a delay. 27 councils, 5.2 million people, 3.7 million registered voters who were planning to have their say in May, who were expecting to exercise their democratic right, who thought they lived in a country where elections happen on schedule unless unless there's an extraordinarily good reason to postpone them. And what's the extraordinarily good reason here? Administrative inconvenience, local government reorganization that's apparently too complex to manage whilst simultaneously preparing for elections. It's pathetic, frankly, and it sets an appalling precedent. Local government minister Alison McGovern tried to justify this democratic abdication with language that sounds reasonable until you actually think what she's saying. We've listened to councils who've told us of the challenges they face reorganizing while preparing for resource-intensive elections for areas which may shortly be abolished. Resource-intensive elections. Yes, elections do require resources. They require staff, venues, ballot papers, counting, verification, all the machinery of democracy. They're supposed to require resources because they're important. They're the mechanism by which citizens hold power to account. Describing them as resource-intensive with that slightly weary tone, as if democracy is just so terribly exhausting, reveals an attitude problem at the heart of this government. McGovern continued, "Several have submitted requests to postpone elections, so it is therefore right we let them have their say so they can focus their time and energy on providing vital services while planning for reorganization. Let them have their say. That's rich, isn't it? Let's let councils have their say about whether elections should happen, but let's not bother asking the actual voters what they think. Let's give councils the choice to avoid democratic accountability, but let's not give citizens the choice to actually participate in that democracy. The priorities here are completely backwards. Councils should not get to decide whether they face elections. That's not how democracy works. Elections aren't optional extras that councils can choose to participate in when convenient. The argument that elections would distract from providing vital services is particularly galling because it implies that democracy and service provision are somehow in competition with each other, as if holding an election means bins don't get collected, potholes don't get filled, social services collapse. Councils have been managing elections and service provision simultaneously since local government began. It's literally their job. The idea that modern councils, with all their resources and professional staff, cannot possibly organize an election whilst also managing a reorganization process suggests staggering incompetence, or more likely a convenient excuse to avoid facing voters during a period when Labour's popularity is declining and they might actually lose seats. And in theory, using social media to communicate government work makes sense. We live in a digital age. People consume information on these platforms. Transparency about enforcement activities could theoretically build public confidence, but there is a massive gap between theory and execution. What the government has actually created is a piece of content so tone-deaf, so obviously performative, that it has become a lightning rod for mockery. The dramatic music, the action movie editing, the whole vibe of it screams, trying too hard. It feels like when your dad tries to use youth slang and somehow makes everything infinitely more awkward. How do you do, fellow border security enthusiasts? It is the governmental equivalent of that. And here is the truly delicious irony in all of this. The government launched this TikTok account presumably to control the narrative around migration and border security. They wanted to show strength, competence, results. Instead, they have handed their critics an absolute gift. They have created a focal point for every joke, every criticism, every ounce of skepticism about their migration policies. The comment section of that lone video has become a digital town square where the British public is exercising its God-given right to take the absolute piss out of authority figures who have made themselves look silly. The question we must ask is, what were they thinking? Did nobody in the entire chain of approval for this project raise their hand and say, hang on, might this come across as a bit daft? Was there no moment of reflection where someone thought perhaps a social media account is not the solution to a complex humanitarian and political crisis? The fact that this made it through multiple levels of government bureaucracy and political oversight without anyone pumping the brakes is genuinely fascinating from a decision-making perspective.
You also have to spare a thought for the poor social media manager who has been assigned to run this account. Imagine that job description. Wanted, social media expert to make illegal immigration enforcement engaging and shareable. Must be comfortable with constant mockery and single-digit engagement rates. Thick skin essential. Apply within. That person is currently living through what can only be described as a professional nightmare. They are the face of one of the most ridiculed government initiatives in recent memory, and they have to keep posting through it all with a stiff upper lip. What makes this entire situation even more absurd is the timing. We are in January 2026. TikTok is hardly new or cutting edge anymore. If the government had launched this 5 years ago, it might have seemed innovative, ahead of the curve. But now it just looks like everyone finally caught up to what young people were doing in 2019 and decided to copy it without understanding why it worked in the first place. It is the policy equivalent of your mum finally getting Snapchat just as everyone has moved on to the next thing. The broader context here matters too. This is not happening in a vacuum. The UK has been grappling with migration issues for years. The small boats crisis has dominated headlines. Different governments have tried different approaches, from the Rwanda scheme to increased channel patrols to international agreements. Some of these approaches have been more successful than others. Some have been controversial,